Hello, and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin from the Modern Observer Group, and with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. How you doing this week?
Doing great, Eric. How are things in Middletown?
Things are good here. Of course, we are well into fall, and in some places in the country, we're heading into winter already.
Yep.
Heard
No.
heard heard this morning that the northern peninsula in Michigan is expecting 2 feet of snow.
Yep. Upper Peninsula, the Yoopers. That's what they call that. The Yoopers. There used to be a band called the Yoopers out there. It was really really funny. But yeah, out here it's just gorgeous. It's peak. I mean, last week I was up in Vermont for several days and hit peak up there, and now it's like that down here. So double dose. Just gorgeous right now.
Yes, it's a nice time of year. And of course, as we're recording this, it's, mid October. Halloween is around the corner. The number one movie this past weekend was the final chapter in the Halloween movies. So we thought this would be the perfect time to talk about fear. And of course, we've mentioned it before in terms of, mindset, but we're going to dig a little deeper how you can deal with fear and why you should not let it control your life. And that's really the biggest part of this because over the past several weeks, I have dealt with a couple of people who suffer from panic attacks. I have dealt with a couple of people who they've got great ideas, they've got great goals, and they're letting fear stop them from moving forward. So that's what we're going to be talking about is, what fear really is and how you can get past it.
Yeah, there's the acronym out there that fear stands for false evidence appearing real. And we talk a lot about how our minds are, we are our own worst enemies when we are wasting the present moment by dwelling in the past, feeling guilt and all the different things that we've done wrong, or worrying about the future, which hasn't happened yet. Instead of, especially on this beautiful October day, although it's cloudy out, just looking out into the woods and noticing all of creativity that's around us, all the wonderful things. So basically, it's what you focus your mind on. And if you get hung up on that, it's human nature to do so. And what we always like to talk about is tools to really, it starts with a positive mindset and just maintaining it, plain and simple. We've talked about this many times before. It's what I teach, it's what you practice. And it's so important. Just realizing that it's always going to be there. So all we're talking about today is things that you need to be aware of so that you can make it less intrusive on your life because it is your choice.
It is. And, I had a very interesting conversation with someone about fear and how it's generated. And fear generally comes from what's referred to as your primitive lizard brain. This goes all the way back, to the start of life when, fight or flight was literally a matter of life and death. And we still have that part of our brain. And that part, and a lot of it is subconscious, it believes that its job is to protect you and to keep you out of harm. Now, the problem with this is that that part of the brain doesn't actually know what causes harm. So anything that's unknown to it, it assumes to be dangerous and it creates a fight or flight response and it generates fear. Now, of course, we know that most of the things that are out there are not dangerous to us and we need to go into the unknown. But this very primitive response holds people back. And the most important thing is for people to understand that this has nothing to do with what's actually out there in the unknown, what you're actually dealing with. It's literally a chemical response within your brain that doesn't have any more knowledge than any other part of you as to what's coming up. Unfortunately, a lot of people tend to give this feeling a lot more importance than it deserves.
Yeah,
And
I like to use the term slavery. It's mental slavery to basically give up your mind to things that you can't control. Now, obviously, there's certain forms of fear, instinctive fear, like danger and so on and so forth. Totally understandable and things you got to watch out for. But again, if you just say, I wonder if this is going to happen, I wonder if that's going to happen, that's part of it too. But in these days and ages, especially over the last 20, 30 years with the internet and everything else that we're surrounded with, it's the influences that we surround ourselves with. Okay. It's growing up, it's all the media that we're watching and listening to. It's listening to people's opinions and so on and so forth. It's wondering if you measure up to other people and so on and so what they're thinking about and that kind of thing. And these are the things that bother you the most, because if you are looking to just fit in and please everybody out there, it's never going to happen. And that's mental slavery too, because the bottom line is we were all created wonderful people and so on. We all have a lot going for us. And if you look at this, when I like to use an analogy when I'm talking about positive mindset development and the power of influences and so on and so forth, and slavery type things, I like to use the analogy, I might have talked about this before, of our mind being our own personal courtroom, because we are sitting here thinking about what other people think about us, grading ourselves and so on and so forth. And so when we're sitting there in the courtroom, there's one person there. We are the accused. We are also the judge. And I actually use a visual of an empty jury box because there's nobody there in the jury. And the reason there's nobody in the jury is because they're all in their personal courtrooms too. We are all the same. And the most important relationship that we have is that with ourselves. And I think Aristotle said that a whole bunch of years ago. So that's what we got to work on. And it starts with working on yourself. And that's what really today's all about as far as overcoming that.
absolutely, and I love that courtroom analogy. But where the question that gets asked when fear kicks in is, it's people go, well, what if XYZ happens? And because of the chemical reaction that goes on in your brain, you tend to focus on that question. But you can also turn that around and go, well, what if XYZ doesn't happen? What if ABC happens? What if DEF happens? There are so many things that can happen, and yet we tend to focus on the most negative. And that's where you really have to control your mindset and get past that. Because if you take a look, an objective look at your life to this point, 99.9% of the time, that worst case scenario that you were so worried about never happens.
Yeah, I think what was the Mark Twain quote, something to the effect, in my life, I have known many problems, most of which have never happened.
Yes, and it's so true. We generate problems that don't exist because we worry about things that aren't going to happen. And on a more minor version of this, I've done this hundreds, if not thousands of times, where I know some event is coming up, and I will go through a dozen, 2 dozen different iterations of potential conflicts, conversations, things that can happen. And of course, none of them ever happen. I'm
Yeah,
ready for them if they happen, but they never do. And everything generally goes well. So, and we do have to remember there's a difference between being afraid and paralyzed and being prepared. And that difference is we want to be prepared for the most likely outcomes. When we deal in fear and we deal in that paralysis, we're focused on the stuff that's probably never going to happen.
Yeah, and one of the things that, again, it's all up in your mind. Visualizing, positive affirmations. Basically, if you think that something positive is going to happen, whatever you're thinking about is most likely to happen. You are going to attract that in. If you're going in there with all the what ifs and so on and so forth, uh, chances are you might have an awful time because you've worried the whole time. And just like you said, nothing happened. In fact, possibly you ran into some good situations at that meeting that you were terrified of in the past. And you walk away saying, wow, this is really good. It wasn't bad at all. And it, again, we're just mental slaves to all the things that haven't happened yet, or all the things that we feel guilty about forever and ever, yet we can give that up. It's just the bottom line is, even criminals get out of jail. Why should we keep ourselves in jail that for stuff that we did 20, 30, 40 years ago and comes back again and again and again? It's easier said than done, but you got to be aware that you do have the power to overpower that with positive thinking. So,
You do. And there's another aspect to fear that most people don't usually talk about. But that fear causes anxiety. But that anxiety is essentially energy. It's getting your heart pumping, it's getting yourself revved up. When that happens, you can use that energy because you can redirect it into something positive. If you're, if you're afraid of a situation and you're thinking about the worst possible thing, well, you can then go, well, if I put a little work into this, I can turn this into and you make it the best possible thing. And then take that anxiety, take that stress level and pour it into the work to turn that around and use it to your advantage. This way you're completely overcoming what you were afraid of and really turning it into something positive.
yeah, you can go online and you can actually Google top lists, Tony Robbins and Jack Canfield, as far as how to overcome fear. I took a look at those to prepare for today. Um, one of the ones that does stick out is exactly what you just talked about by Tony Robbins. It says, recognize that fear can work to your advantage. And it says, when you feel fear, your soul wants to tell you something, so listen. View the fear as a piece of information instead of a threat to your survival. When you use anxiety to your advantage, it can't ruin your life. In overcoming fear, it becomes your ally, a critical source of guidance to reach your full potential. So it's most important just to stay in the present moment and think about it. Ask yourself, is this real? And think about what the message is that this is trying to tell you, and then realize, put some positivity in there, overpower with some of the positive thoughts. I talk about gratitude journals and things like that, um, to guide you over that. But if all you're thinking about that is, then you're just going to build that up, and it's going to really, again, cause anxiety and a whole lot of negative things. But you're doing it all to yourself with your thoughts.
Absolutely. And of course Tony Robbins said that better than I ever could. But
True.
you're right about, we're doing this to ourselves. And it's where the statement you are your own worst enemy comes from. Because we put ourselves through these things. No one else is doing this, no one else is generating it. It's all self generated. And since the fear is self generated, the solution can be too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, getting back to the positive mindset, I mean, I always talk about that. And I talk about tools, I talk about maintenance method, and I talk about throwing things out. And the tools that you have, very, very simple. I know I've said this before, but be a goofball first thing in the morning, go to the mirror, smile at yourself in the mirror, give yourself a high five saying, today, wherever I go, whatever I'm doing, I will be positive. That's right out of the book, The High Five Habit by Mel Robbins. But that's a great way to start the day. And then things like a gratitude journal, and very, very importantly, is mindfulness. And mindfulness, it can be a long period of silence or whatever, but if you just sit there and you contemplate on the overall picture in silence, not saying a word, that goes a world a long ways in helping you towards a positive mindset. And then the maintenance method is gratitude. Start a gratitude journal and write down things every day. Start a morning, have a positive morning routine, a positive going to bed routine. And then most importantly is the throwouts. And these are all of our bad habits that are causing these fears in the first place. All the what ifs and so on and so forth, throwing out the past, throwing out what people think about you, criticizing, complaining, all these different things that we do automatically, and throw out your exposure to the media. You have a choice of turning off all the stuff around you and learning about things without exposing yourself every single minute of the day or every 5 or 10 minutes to that. Because the more you expose yourself to that, the more negativity you're going to have in your mind, and the more likely you are to be fearful of everything.
Absolutely. And it's so important to have a toolkit that can help you deal with these things. And of course, I tend to rely on what I call the Robbins trilogy, which is Mel Robbins, Tony Robbins, and Baskin Robbins.
Oh,
Because Tony Robbins and Mel Robbins have put out some great books, some great stuff you can use, and quite frankly, there's nothing quite like a good ice cream cone to get you through things. So that's where Baskin Robbins comes in.
I approve that message.
But and that is actually something you need to know when when you encounter fear, when you start getting anxious. What is it that helps you calm down and focus? And I say Baskin Robbins, as a joke, but quite frankly, ice cream has actually been proven to be a calming influence on people because people tend to revert back to it's a comforting thing from childhood. And there are a lot of things, a lot of different foods that people have that put them in that comfort zone and go, "Oh, okay, things aren't as bad as I thought." It can be as simple as a cup of hot chocolate. But have that toolkit ready. Know what calms you down. It can be a piece of music that you listen to, a favorite movie that you watch. But when you use these things, they get you into that positive mindset, that comfortable mindset. And then you go, "Oh, okay, it's not so bad. Now that I've gotten past the anxiety part of it, I can deal with what's going on and actually plan for what I was afraid of."
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have one of the points from Tony Robbins is a lot of our problems is not achieving goals. So he says, create goals that are musts. Okay. Oftentimes, the process of overcoming fear becomes stymied by uninspiring or elusive goals we set for ourselves. So turn around and ask, what life do you really desire? What's your passion and purpose, and that kind of thing? And set your goals according to that. And they will get you a lot more pumped as far as succeeding instead of failure. And then going to Jack Canfield, his very last one is celebrate your successes. And I thought about that as soon as you mentioned Baskin Robbins ice cream and everything else that you can do for yourself, because it's really, really important to do that. A lot of times, one of our biggest problems is that we don't pat ourselves on the back enough genuinely instead of thinking that we're being arrogant. And it's okay to do that, to just genuinely pat yourself on the back when you achieve things, because that's what we're supposed to be doing. And that's, what our creator would like to see us do. That's what we're celebrating. So, you know, celebrate your successes. Life doesn't have to be, oh, okay, people are going to look down on me if I'm being successful. That's part of what the influences out there say, and they're 100% wrong.
Yeah, people are wrapped up in their own successes and failures far too much to pay attention to yours. So while we all think everybody's looking at us going, "Oh, they didn't succeed, they failed at this, they failed that," they're all worried about what they're succeeding and failing at. They're not worried about what you're succeeding and failing at. That's something that we project that doesn't exist.
Yeah, it goes back to the empty courtroom.
Yep,
It's where it is.
it really does. And that's something, again, all of this is generated by us. And part of it is that fight or flight reflex. And part of it is something that's been referred to as analysis paralysis. You're so worried about what could happen or what's going to happen that you're planning for every single outcome and you never actually do anything. And in fact, I was dealing with someone recently. They're launching their own business, but at the same time that they're launching their own business, they're afraid of not having the income. So they're also looking for a job. And those two things are taking energy away from each other. So either they need to be looking for a job or they need to be starting their business and really put the energy into one or the other. Dealing from a position of fear, where you're saying, well, let me make sure I've got all the bases covered, generally keeps you from succeeding because you're not putting the effort focused into one thing that you can succeed at.
Yeah, and if you are focusing on the wrong primary result, obviously it's really important to have the income. If that's the driver for everything and you're not getting there, that really knocks people out. The most important thing you need to do is, again, get back to what is your passion and purpose in life? What are you good at? What do you want to do? And so on and so forth. And if you have to have a job on the side while you're working towards that business that's going to help you succeed with that, and you put it in perspective that that's actually getting you one step closer to that, as opposed to I have to do this and so on and so forth from pressure. It, again, it's all how you look at things. It's all about perspective, which is so important. And perspective is nothing more than how you look at things. Are you positive? Are you negative? You're going to be up and down. But if you can get 51% positive, it makes a world of difference. Comes right out of the law of attraction, the secret from all those years back.
Exactly. And, with the toolkit and your perception, you mentioned Jack Canfield. And of course, we've talked about this formula before. It's, event plus reaction equals outcome. If you're concerned about the outcome, if that's what you're afraid of, you have complete control over your reaction to make that outcome what you want.
Yeah, actually, I like to talk. It's event plus response
Yes.
equals equals outcome, because reaction, that's a thought, that's a feeling, and those are always going to be up and down. But your response can be silence, it can be turning thing around, it can be changing the subject. That's what you control, and that's where the mindfulness comes in, is putting that pregnant pause after you react to something and say to yourself, is it worth responding to it? And I use, the Thich Nhat Hanh thing, saying basically simplicity, simplifying things down, ask, is it really real? And then silence, which is just not saying anything, just thinking about it. And then compassion, thinking about the positive results that you're looking for. And if what you're going to do as far as response doesn't achieve that, your best response is silence.
Exactly. And sometimes silence is what's necessary. Not just in situations where you need to give yourself that time to figure out your response, but sometimes you need to have silence to decide to walk away. Like I had a situation not too long ago. A friend of mine posted something on Facebook, and it was almost completely factually incorrect. So I said, well, that's not true. And I gave the facts. And their response to that was, no, what I said is absolutely true. So my response was nothing, because they just showed me, okay, they're more interested in their point of view than what's actually the facts. There's no point in arguing it because they don't want to hear another point of view or another fact. So just walk away and let it go. And
Yeah.
a lot of times that's what you really need to do, is just look at the situation and go, okay, I can make the point, I can argue a point, but is anything really going to be gained by that? And if the answer is no, just walk away and let it go.
Yep, and we talked about this. Jack Canfield's success principles, how to win friends and influence people. Listen, it's so important not only to listen to people, but listen to understand, even if you disagree with them. And if you can't come to an agreement, just agree to disagree. Because
Right.
I'm right, you're right. If we disagree on how we're right, there's no book out there that's you can look it up and say, nope, I was right on this one and you were right on that one, and so on and so forth. It just doesn't work that way. But the more that you can listen to understand and appreciate people, this is where the compassion comes in. We're all different. And but we have to respect where everybody's coming from because people all basically came from good. And you got to understand that. So again, the more you get hepped up on what other people think and so on and so forth, you're going to drive yourself crazy and you're going to fear everything.
Exactly. And again, my kids used to watch, and I always found it funny because the show it came from was off the air 20 years before either of my kids were born. But there was an old cartoon in the 80s based on the G.I. Joe toys. And at the end of every episode, they would have a little fact, and they would go, and now you know, and knowing is half the battle. And my kids loved those clips. And anytime they would learn something, they would go, and now we know, and knowing is half the battle. That's what fear is about. If you know what's going to come, if you know how you can respond, if you know what your options are, that fear subsides because knowing is half the battle.
Absolutely.
So yeah, the more you know, the more you grow. And we've said it on this podcast numerous times. The more you learn, the more you earn. It's all about actually understanding. Keep learning, keep growing, keep finding out new things. And the more you know, and the more you're comfortable with, the less that fear has a hold on you.
Yeah, and use what you know with compassion with others instead of say this, and this,
No,
because you know better than to do that.
exactly. You don't want to be lecturing people. You want to be talking with them. And again, there's a difference between knowing the facts and knowing what to do with them. There's an old saying: knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. It's not just enough to know facts, you have to understand how to use them, and how that and your wisdom and compassion all combine to help you overcome the fear. All right, so we are just about at the end of our time. So, Chip, what do you think the big takeaway for our listeners is this week?
Well, start with positivity, start with perspective, and let that overrule negativity because it does every time. Negativity is never going to go away. Canfield came up with a great last, just a little exercise, a mental trick. It says recognize fear for what it is. And it says this is a mental trick your ego uses to protect you from negative outcomes it imagines. You create your fear and you have the power to dissolve it at will. Think about something that you're afraid to do. Now replace that fear with this first sentence says, I want to blank, and I scare myself by imagining blank. Transform that to, instead of scaring myself by imagining blank, I will do this. And get into a habit of doing that. Repeat that several times for that instance. And the more you think about the fear and what you're going to do, just think about it. You're going to realize that that fear is really not real. And what you're going to do about it is a positive thing. So, whatever tricks you can use, it's really, really important. But when you're thinking about fears, think about something positive on top of that. Thinking about something that you've accomplished, that you've done well for other people, and so on and so forth, instead of what you're bringing against yourself in your own mental courtroom.
I like that. I think for me, the big takeaway this week is The fact that fear is self generated. We are doing this to ourselves and we don't need to. And in fact, people, think of bravery as the absence of fear. That's not true. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward despite the fear and not letting the fear control you. And that's really what it's all about. We're never going to eliminate the fear. We just have to eliminate its control over us. You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch us every week at xvadio.com/podcasts, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. We'll see you then.